How's it going, guys? Today we're going to go and review a little bit about what's involved in range of motion, passive range of motion, active range of motion, what they're about, how we change them, and then some thoughts that we can take into consideration when we are thinking about programming to improve these characteristics. So, range of motion is going to be constrained. It's going to be constrained by controllable things and then uncontrollable things. Uncontrollable constraints could be a hip replacement, could be a spinal fusion, something where there's not a lot we can do anymore, right? Then we have controllable constraints, something where the tissue can be influenced, we can strength train it, we can stretch it, so on and so forth. It's not a bony something that's going to limit us for what we can do. It's a tissue, so we can influence it and make change. Range of motion is also going to be determined by experience, past and the present. So you are always communicating to your body. You are always telling your body how it should be acting, how it should be moving, how it should be conserving energy, and what forms it should be taking. Your body is usually in its most efficient form for whatever you are telling it to do the most. So this could speak to your desk jobs, your baseball career, whatever you've been doing for the longest amount of time. Your environment is going to shape you and your body is going to shape to your environment. This could be good or it could be bad. If you are a baseball player and your shoulder looks way crazy on one side compared to the other, this is good. Research shows, the throwing side is going to have a lot more of a range of motion and external range of motion than it will on the other side. This is conducive to throwing a ball 100 miles an hour. That's good, right? If you are now a father of 3 and your shoulder is jacked up and it's not exactly doing what you need to keep up with your kids, right? No longer conducive. So then the present is our active thought process towards our range of motion, and can we change it? Are we just letting life shape us, or are we trying to actively make change in our bodies that fit our daily activities and our needs, right? So that's going to be range of motion. Range of motion is going to be divided up into 2 main ranges of motion, passive and active. So to think about active, I want you to think about, can the thing be moved? Can it move through space, right? So if I take my wrist, can I move it through space? Can I move my elbow through space? That's the passive range of motion. It's going to be governed by the bone-on-bone interactions, tissue surrounding the bone, so on and so forth. Active range of motion is, can it move itself? So if I can move the arm, can the arm move itself? Also, does it have the ability to give effort where it needs to be? That's going to speak to specificity when we get down there. Passive range of motion, what determines it? What is it governed by? We have some research showing that the tissue architecture is what is going to lead us to one passive range of motion looking like one thing and the other looking like the other. What that means is we might have stiffer or more loose tissue. We might have lengths in fascicle length change. We might have less stiffness in our muscle tendon units. Basically, the tissue itself can change in extensibility. The research is looking at this and pointing towards it, but it is also governed by, and what is most likely, more likely, probably the bigger piece of the pie, is this tolerance to stretch. So a neural, controlled by the brain range of motion. You can think about it like a governor on your car. The car could go to 200 miles an hour, but most likely it stops at like 150. And I don't even know if any of us need to go over 100 kind of stuff, right? So your body always has the capability. Most likely your bicep length is as long as it'll probably ever need to be in your life. But if you're stuck with an elbow in this angle, there's a reason why, right? And it probably deals with these things. So that neural tolerance probably is the majority of the piece of pie, and the tissue architecture is changeable, but probably going to contribute a little less. Parasympathetic state is the rest and digest, loosey-goosey feelings and experiences we get with our nervous system. That's also going to be a major determinant of your range of motion. If you're always stressed and you're always beating your body up, chances are it's not going to allow you to have a lot of range of motion, which is evident in things like foam rolling and massage therapy, where we can take a really stressed, stiff body, go for an hour massage, and immediately feel a lot better, right? So what that speaks to the fact is we've made a mind change that kind of temporarily tricked your body to having more range of motion. But our goal is not to always trick ourselves into more range of motion. We want to have range of motion all the time when we wake up. And that's where I think the active range of motion comes into play the most, although we're going to have to understand what we need to prioritize when it comes to our training. Very simply, if you don't have the range of motion that you need to do your thing, you probably have to expand the range of motion first. So if I want to go into professional get coffee out of cupboards that's up here, I need to make sure I have a shoulder that can get up there. If I only have a shoulder that goes here, I need to expand. So I might need to expand my passive range and then create some active control and strength there. How do we know? We usually run into a block. So if I take my arm and I lift it up and it kind of stops, I'm getting some resistance, I can see if I can increase it a little bit. So I might apply a light isometric or an effort. So I'm gonna say, hey, Colin, with your left arm, push into my lower hand. If I then can open up more range, well, it wasn't a uncontrollable constraint, it was a controllable constraint. So for whatever reason, my passive range of motion is limited by something probably along the tissue lines, but it's changeable, especially in the short term, which is good news for our long term. Now, are those the cups in the cupboard up there 30 pounds or are they 5 ounces? There's the active range of motion. So just because you can put the arm up there, now can you get the job done? So active range of motion, what is that governed by? That's going to be governed by effort, consistency, and specificity. Effort talks to strength training in general. If you want to get stronger at something, the research and literature shows you need to be trying hard at least 70% of your max effort for that thing. That's enough of a reason for your brain to go, I'm going to get stronger. I'm going to give you more tissue. I'm going to give you more neural drive, blah, blah, blah. I got stronger. If you're not working hard, you're not going to get stronger. Consistency. So just because you worked hard once and you fell off the wagon for a month and you got back on, chances are over the course of a year, you shouldn't expect long-term change, right? And specificity. Are you doing the range of motion or active strength training where you need it, right? Is it within the mid ranges that you're weak and you keep getting hurt? Is it at the end ranges? Are you trying to expand your range of motion? Are you trying to add more strength out there? Are you respecting the contraction that you need? Is it a weird, slow eccentric? Maybe I'm falling into a split that I need to be strong at. Or it's a high-speed concentric, like throwing a baseball at end range. The speed. Did I fall into a split really fast? Or am I like slowly on ice, just falling, and I need to make sure my groins don't split, right? So the specificity is really important when it comes to the active range of motion portion of this. You can't train slow and expect to be strong at fast. And you can't train slow in mid-range and expect to be strong at speed at end range. You need to start general, but eventually specificity takes over. So, when it comes to programming, I think the best way to start is to take an example of a very simple day that I might program for an athlete or a regular human. You guys are important too. Let's keep it simple and let's look at a 3-block superset. So we have 2 exercises over 3 blocks. What we need to know about a program is that you're going to come into the training session with lots of energy, and by the end of the session you're probably going to have less energy. So exercises that need more energy for higher output or higher strength effort should probably stay up front. So for example, I have a sprint and a box jump, followed by a squat and a pull-up, ending with bicep curls and cardio, long, slow cardio, right? This is a very simple example of a plyometric-y speed block, followed by a strength block, followed by your accessory and easy cardio block, where you don't have to give as much effort, right? Now, you guys that want to do HIIT and run sprints hard all the time, flip-flop, let's just keep it simple for today, right? This would make sense. And again, probably a good way to look at this is some questions we should ask ourselves all the time when we're comes to programming. This falls under the does this make sense block. These comments are not limited, but here are a few, right? Am I competing with other tissues? So am I doing squat plus leg plus leg plus leg, expecting to get high effort, quality effort out of each one of those? What's my energy look like? Am I doing something really fast, really technical, or highly demanding of quality effort, and I'm putting it all the way at the end when I'm absolutely dead? Is it goal limiting? So if I'm trying to sprint really fast, and let's blend this in with some flexibility, and we know roughly from the literature, if I take a long, intense stretch, my effort or my force output should go down a little bit, or a lot of it, depending upon what you're doing, right? Would I put a long, intense stretch immediately before a sprint? No, because that would limit the goal of the sprint. My time. Research shows that stretching takes time. We might have to sit there for a few minutes to get something, right? So is it practical to plug a long stretch in there when perhaps I have a goal that I need to get a little sooner? Is there other practical means that I can increase my range of motion without actually doing something long and taking more time, right? How do we balance our time? You might only have an hour session for your client. You might only have 20 minutes to send your online client something to do. Is it a dangerous idea? If I come in and I have a squat and I can only squat to quarter depth, and I trick my body and my nervous system to allow me more range of motion, so now I come down to all the way down to the ground. Magic. Would I give that squatter something close to their personal record? I just tricked their body into having all this range of motion that they have little experience with, right? Little time training with, and I'm going to give them something really hard to do. I think the body is now much more likely at risk for injury because it just doesn't know how to handle that intensive a load in that range of motion, right? Some questions to ask yourself as you're programming. So let's look at the blocks here, and let's just say what we would and may not do. So we talked about the sprint block. My knee's not in your way. Oh no, we're good. Right, so let's say one thing I wouldn't do and one thing I might do. Oh, we don't have green, we're gonna use blue today. Beep, beep. Okay, so one thing that I probably wouldn't do, like we talked about, is a very long, intense stretch before sprint. Ran out of words, so we used an arrow. right? A V long intense stretch before sprinting, let's specify, perhaps of the hamstrings or quads before sprinting, wouldn't make too much sense because we would be going against the goal limiting thing. I might want to warm up specifically with some like 50% of my max effort, get some jumping in, which is a stretch, but we'll talk about that, right? Before the sprint, that way I'm not limiting the performance or the effort that I can give in my sprint, so I can actually get the benefit that I'm trying to get from the sprint, right? And so we talked about that even jumping, like jumping rope, is technically a stretch, right? But it's a ballistic stretch. It's happening at high speeds, so it's actually creating a little bit of stiffness in there. It does not have the long duration hold effect to the brain that a long duration hold stretch does. That's why it's a little different. So what could I do here? I sprinted, I box jumped. That sounds like a lot of lower body, right? So I might do an upper flexibility mobility guy. Perfect timing, right? That's totally fine. Squat and pull up, right? So we have let's call it a heavy lower body squat, and we're going heavy on the pull up. So what I can do, and let's make it tissue similar but not tissue competitive. So with a squat, let's do just some hip circles, some hip cars for my FRS community. So maybe I do some hip cars. So yes, I'm using my legs in intensity, but now I'm literally just scanning my hip. It's a nice way to kind of like actively recover the body. We're trying to groove out more hip, so on and so forth. That makes a lot more sense to throw in somewhere here, right? Then let's say a high intensity hip car. So let's do hip car plus, 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 angry crying face, right? Same thing, same exercise can be a good idea or a less good idea. It doesn't have to be a completely different concept, right? And then again, we'll look down at the very last block, bicep curl, cardio. So what I probably wouldn't do is, after all of this, I ran a lot, I did a lot of high box jumps, squat and pull up. Let's say I'm a rock climber and I really want to work on my knee getting super high to my chest so I can get a good high foot. Or I'm a gymnast and I want to work on really getting a nice long straight leg as high. I'm not a gymnast. I probably wouldn't do that. So I wouldn't do a high intensity, right? AROM drill. Is it dangerous? Probably not. But am I gonna be working at the effort required to make the change I want? Probably not. I'm really tired, running on E, right? Something I could do, your low intensity cars, maybe some, I hate to call them, I don't know, flows, but movement. So you're getting your movement nutrition. Maybe it's your cat-cow that you're working on, or maybe it's a priority body part that your coach is like, hey, with your job, with your environment, you don't move this too often. I want you to move it a lot. So let's call it cat-cow, because you haven't moved your spine an awful lot. You might sit like this forever. You might be doing something else. You might not be thinking about it, right? It might be part of your rehab, whatever it is. So these are just a few examples of how to think about range of motion training. Again, the goal is to create the usable range of motion that you need for your life, activity, sport, whatever that is, which means you have to assess yourself first. You have to understand where you're at, range of motion, movement, joint-wise, where you need to go. And if it's not looking good, you need to expand your range of motion. You have to make sure, are there controllable things I can change? Are there uncontrollable things I can't change and just have to work around, right? And then work those things. Work them often because your past is very powerful to change your range of motion. And then your present activities are really important too. Am I just bending over to garden so I don't have to work maybe as hard? Or am I trying to throw a 100-mile-an-hour fastball without my arm tearing at that high speed and range, right? All these things have to be considered. And then we don't treat anything too differently. We just have to understand some principles of, right, maybe the one of the long, slow, intense stretch makes us give up less effort afterwards. So I'm not gonna put something that needs effort afterwards. Energy, goal limiting. Am I doing 17 leg exercises in a row expecting high quality out of all of them? The way you would program a general old school strength and conditioning program is how you have to think about your range of motion stuff, because it's the same. We just have to make sure that we're giving the appropriate effort, we're not competing with anything, and we're not doing anything dumb, right? Does it make sense? So, more of these to come for sure. If you have any questions, you guys know where to find me. Thanks.